So as you look around here, you might get some idea of what was going on in the first scripture lesson this morning. This is Genesis 1, chapters 24 through 31. God spoke, "Earth, generate life, every sort and kind, cattle and reptiles and wild animals, all kinds." And there it was, wild animals of every kind, cattle of all kinds, every sort of reptile and bug. God saw that it was good. God spoke, "Let us make human beings in our image, make them reflecting our nature, so they can be responsible for the fish in the sea, the birds in the air, the cattle, and yes, earth itself, and every animal that moves on the face of the earth." God created human beings. God created them godlike, reflecting God's nature. God created them male and female. God blessed them. Prosper, reproduce, fill earth, take charge. Be responsible for the fish in the sea and the birds in the air, for every living thing that moves on the face of the earth. Then God said, "I've given you every sort of seed-bearing plant on earth and every kind of fruit-bearing tree, given them to you for food. To all the animals and all birds, everything that moves and breathes. I give whatever grows out of the ground for food." And there it was. God looked over everything God had made. It was so good, so very good.
So a few years ago, it was before I met Mike, so it was more like 20 years ago. Feels like a few years ago. A couple of girlfriends and I took a road trip. Our ultimate destination was Glacier National Park. So we started here in the Bay Area. We headed north through California, up through Oregon. We went into eastern Washington and then across the panhandle of Idaho and then into Montana. And then on the way back, we kind of circled around another way, and we came through Idaho and into eastern Oregon, and then dropped down into northeastern California, which I grew up in California. I'd never been to that part of the state before. And so on the way, we visited Crater Lake, which we had also never been to. And so we set up camp, which isn't, the campgrounds there are not really close to the lake. It's not like you have a lake view when you camp at Crater Lake. So we set up our camp and we, got back into the Jeep and we headed out to get our first view of the lake. And I still have this very clear memory of coming around a curve and catching my first glimpse of that deep crater and that impossibly blue water. Those of you who have seen, how many of you have seen Crater Lake? So you know what I'm talking, lots of you know what I'm talking about. And we all, at the same time, all three of us went, and we pulled over as soon as we could so that we could just stand there and look at this amazing thing. And I thought to myself, this is the most beautiful place I have ever been. And then we went to Glacier. And we stood on the shore of McDonald Lake by that incredibly clear, cold, glacial water surrounded by these jagged, glacially formed peaks with snow on the top, or glaciers on the top. And sunset late in the afternoon, and I thought, this is the most beautiful place I've ever been. And the thing is, I have said that so many times in my life. I've been saying that all through my life, from childhood in Yosemite Valley, and as a preteen standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and just last year standing in Thingfeller National Park in Iceland, where you can stand between the North American tectonic plate and the Eurasian tectonic plate and stand in the place where they are separating by an inch every year. These beautiful, wild, amazing places, they kind of live in me. They fill me, and they continue to fill me even after I've seen them, and the place is just a memory in my mind. And they make me feel that my job here as a human being is to make sure that those places still exist for the future humans who come after me. And it's not only the extraordinary places like Crater Lake or Glacier or Iceland or any of those other extraordinary places, but the ordinary places too, like our hills, our East Bay Hills, and our bay shoreline, and the birds, the wild birds in my backyard, and the pair of swallows that nest over my porch every year. And this wonder and gratitude that I have for wild places is one of the reasons that I've always had some trouble with parts of the first chapter of Genesis, especially the sixth day, which is what John read to you today. It was the sixth day of creation. Especially verse 28, where God gives instructions to humans. God has just created. And here's verse 28 in the King James Version. I chose the version the translation that John read with a particular reason. But here's the King James Version, which some of you might remember. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful, multiply and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. So one reason I chose the translation that John read is because it takes that subdue and dominion language and says, be responsible for the earth. Did you hear that? Be responsible for the fish of the sea and the birds of the air. And I think that has a closer, I think that word responsible is closer to the meaning that I take from this text. And I think that's actually what the original writers intended. Because this morning's texts also say, and I hope you heard this in the text as well, that we are made in God's image. God created us in God's image, and as such, we are basically God's representatives here on earth. And if we are to rule over earth, which is what the word dominion basically means, it comes from the Hebrew word rada, which does mean rule, then we are to rule over it as God would do, not as we humans would do. Ruling as God would rule means not rule by destruction of creation for our own needs, but rule for the welfare of all creation. It means not placing ourselves over creation, but remembering that we are a part of creation. If we use the imagery that's common in Scripture, the kind of dominion we are to have over the earth is the kind of dominion that a shepherd has for the flock that is in his or her care. The shepherd that cares for and feeds and tends and takes care of. So God's style of dominion isn't about exploitation and abuse, but is instead about assuring the flourishing of every place and every creature. Ooh. Are you paying attention?
We're waiting now.
So what would our world be like if we had all been called to tenderly and lovingly care for all God's creation like a shepherd, rather than seeing the earth as an endless opportunity for resource extraction? Which makes me think of this place, right? This was a site of resource extraction. This was a quarry. What would our world be like if we allowed the wonder and awe that we feel for these places to call us to tenderly and lovingly care for all of God's creation, like a shepherd? What if we allowed the wonder and awe that we feel for these beautiful and wild places and the ordinary places to move us into a constant gratitude for the creation that we're part of? How would our lives change? And how would our world change if we did that? I'm going to invite to come up and tell you a little story about an experience she's had recently caring for one little part of God's creation.
All right, can everyone hear me? Yes. All right. When we found him, he wasn't even the weight of a third of a cup of water. He was dehydrated, emaciated, and hypothermic. He was, however, far from helpless. Or rather, he certainly wasn't lacking in help. When Rocky, an orphan neonatal squirrel, showed up on our porch, where he came from, little investigated, we found out that this little guy came from a tree around 100 feet away. Hard to you or to me, but that's well over 1,000 times Rocky's length. This would be the equivalent of an average human traveling just over 1 mile, except Rocky was also blind, furless, and unable to stand. Rocky was 4 weeks old and 66 grams when he first came into our care. Now he's 9 weeks and too crazy to be put on a scale, but had tripled his weight when we last weighed him 2 weeks ago. Thinking back, it's so hard for me to imagine the days where even the loss of a gram would rightfully cause panic, when now I don't even need to weigh him. Before his heater, which was purchased online, had arrived, a sack of rice had to be heated every 2 hours to keep him warm, day and night. Once it had arrived, it brought me relief and sleep. However, he still had to be fed every 4 hours. This was rather hard because although he barely ate even half a teaspoon of formula per feeding, it still usually took an hour to feed him his milk replacer drop by drop and clean up his massive eating mess after. Now that he can eat solid food, he is fed formula twice a day and can guzzle a teaspoon of his squirrel formula, which wasn't easy to find, in minutes. Rocky didn't even look like a squirrel at first. He was a gray, lifeless bundle of bones and skin. With the fur and poofy tail he has now, you can definitely tell he's a squirrel, albeit a small and fluffy one. In a week, I will begin the process of weaning him away from human attention in preparation for his release. I know it will break my heart, and I know it will break my heart even more the day Rocky leaves and never comes back. But I am still grateful that I was able to have this amazing experience, and I am grateful for how much I have learned and matured from it and from him.
So how many of you have inside you somewhere a story about gratitude for God's creation? Oh, come on. I'm not going to ask you to come up here and share it. But I am going to ask you to share it with the people near you. So for the next few minutes, I'd like you to gather together with somebody nearby. And I hope that you talk to someone maybe that you don't usually talk to, because I know you're sitting next to your family or your good church friends. So, move around a little bit. Gather with, another in maybe 3s or 4s. And share stories with each other. Share those stories of gratitude of the most beautiful things you've ever seen, 5 of them, or some encounter with God's creation that has made you grateful and full of awe. And we'll take some time for this. And if you'd rather quietly draw your gratitude, your story, you can do that. That's what the crayons and the paper are out there for. And kids can do this too. So I know our kids are old enough to have had stories about God's creation. So share those stories with your children as well. And then I'll ring the bell every once in a while just to kind of remind you to move on to the next person, because I know we can get going, can't we? Okay, so share your stories. It was only just in case. Moving into the Old Testament part of our service with the fire and brimstone. So just to wrap up, what I want to do kind of a wave thing. I want you to think of one word or maybe two that feels like it captures something about your conversations today. One word, two, three, that captures something about your conversation today. Think about that. And then we're going to start over here. And I just want you to call them out as we move around the room. Does that make sense? Do you have a word?
Gratitude.
Gratitude. Okay, let's move along.
Just our backyard, the beauty of it. Glory.
Glorious. Backyard beauty.
Nature.
Nature.
Awestruck.
Awestruck.
Calm.
Calm.
Familiarity.
Familiarity.
Peace.
Peace.
Water.
Water.
Memories.
Memories.
Restoration.
Restoration.
Reverence.
Reverence.
Mystery and unexpected.
Mystery and unexpected.
Peace.
Peace.
Love.
Love.
Birth.
Birth.
Family.
Sense of God.
Family. Sense of God.
Adventure.
Adventure. Anything else?
Family.
Family.
Healing.
Healing. Cazadero.
Yes. Redwood.
Redwoods.
Frozen.
Frozen.
Snow.
Mountains. Snow.
Clouds.
Clouds. Diversity.
Sunshine.
Sunshine. Quality.
Companion animals.
Companion animals. Forests.
Adventure.
Adventure. Camaraderie. For all these things, we give you thanks, O God. Amen.